The rain had slowed to a mist when the famous pianist stepped out of the car in front of the small cultural center. He had performed in grand concert halls all over the world, but today's event was different. It was a charity program arranged in a modest town where music rarely reached large audiences. He liked such events because they reminded him of simpler days before fame settled around him like a heavy coat. He arrived earlier than planned, hoping to walk around quietly without attracting attention. His manager had stayed behind to take a phone call, so he had a few minutes to himself. He pulled his jacket tighter, looked around the parking area, and stepped toward the building. The center looked old, but welcoming warm lights glowed through the windows, and handmade posters decorated the entrance. When he pushed open the door, he was greeted by the soft sounds of people talking and moving things around. Volunteers were setting up chairs, adjusting the lights, and practicing short speeches for the evening. They were simple, everyday people trying their best to create something meaningful. He always respected that kind of effort. He kept his hood low, expecting that some people might recognize him. But to his surprise, no one paid much attention. Everyone seemed busy, and he didn't mind slipping into the background. It allowed him to breathe for a moment, to feel human again, and not like the center of a spotlight. He moved deeper into the lobby, listening to the faint sound of an old piano being tapped. Not really played, more like tested. The notes were uneven and broken, like a person checking if the instrument was still alive. He followed the sound until he reached a small side room with warm yellow lighting. Inside, a humble woman stood near the upright piano. She looked as if she wasn't used to being in the center of attention. Her clothes were simple, her posture gentle, and her eyes soft but slightly nervous. A few volunteers were gathered around her, encouraging her. "Come on," one of them said kindly. "Just a little tune. You play so well. It would make the setup time nicer." The woman shook her head quickly. No, I don't play for others. I'm not any good anymore. I just touch the keys sometimes. That's all." Her voice was calm, but filled with quiet sincerity, as if she believed every word she said. The pianist leaned against the doorway, watching the scene with interest. People often said such things when they were simply shy, and he couldn't help finding it charming. He was used to grand introductions and loud admiration, so moments like this felt refreshing. There was something about the woman's modesty that made him pause. One volunteer laughed gently. Even a little melody would be lovely. But the woman kept shaking her head. She stepped back from the piano, as if it belonged to someone more deserving. The pianist couldn't resist joining in, not out of mockery, but out of light-hearted teasing. His voice carried smoothly across the room. "If she won't play," he said with a smile, "maybe I can help. I know a little something about the piano." The volunteers turned toward him, their eyes widening at the sight of who was speaking. One whispered to another, and then another. The realization spread through the group like a quiet ripple. The famous pianist, the star of the event, had walked into their small room without any announcement, but the woman didn't turn around right away. She seemed unaware of who had offered to play. She simply lifted her head slightly and looked at him politely, as if he were just another helpful stranger. "Oh," she said, almost apologetically, "I didn't mean to cause trouble. You don't have to play either. I'm sure you're busy." Her innocence made one volunteer cover his mouth to hide a laugh. The pianist felt a warm amusement rise inside him. It had been years since someone spoke to him like that, like he was an ordinary guest. He almost wanted to keep it that way. "Busy?" He replied with a grin. "Not at the moment." And it's always good to test the piano before a performance. One volunteer finally stepped closer to her and whispered loud enough for him to hear, "He is the pianist, the one performing tonight." The woman blinked, her eyebrows lifting slightly in surprise. "Oh, I didn't know," she said. "I'm sorry." "No need to apologize. he said gently. "But since we're both here, maybe I should give the piano a try. Unless you want to go first?" She shook her head quickly, stepping aside. "No, no, you go ahead." He walked toward the piano, pretending to study it with great seriousness. The instrument was old, definitely older than him, with scratches on the surface and keys that were slightly uneven. But it had personality, something many polished concert pianos lacked. He pressed a finger on one of the keys, letting the soft, imperfect tone fill the room. "It has charm," he said, mostly to himself, but loud enough for others to hear. The volunteers nodded. A few took seats to listen. He sat down on the worn bench, which wobbled slightly beneath him. The woman folded her hands together, standing a polite distance away, unsure of what to expect. He placed his hands on the keys lightly, warming up with a few gentle chords. Even from those first sounds, the room brightened. The volunteers smiled. The woman watched him with quiet interest, her face still careful, as if she didn't want to intrude. He began to play a short, cheerful melody. Nothing dramatic or overly impressive, just a light, pleasant tune meant to make the moment comfortable. The notes danced through the small room, blending with the gentle hum of activity outside the door. The volunteers swayed a little, enjoying the unexpected mini-performance. When he finished, he looked up at the woman with playful curiosity in his eyes. "Your turn," he teased softly. "I played something small. Now it's fair for you to try." The woman froze for a moment, uncertainty drifting across her face. She shook her head again, though less firmly this time. "I really shouldn't. I haven't played in a long time." He tilted his head, his tone light, friendly. "You don't have to impress anyone. Just play something simple. A few notes, even." The volunteers nodded encouragingly. "Just a tiny bit," one of them said. The woman looked from the piano to the people around her. Her fingers tightened and relaxed again, as if remembering something. A quiet battle played out inside her shyness, fighting with a feeling deeper than fear. Maybe longing. Maybe habit. Maybe a memory she tried to keep buried. The pianist watched her closely. He was good at reading people on stage, and something about her expression made him slow down. There was a story behind her hesitation, a quiet weight she carried. He recognized that look. Many musicians had it, the feeling of being connected to music but unsure if the world still wanted to hear them. She took a small breath. Maybe. "Just for a moment," she whispered. The volunteers clapped in soft celebration, and she gave a shy smile, almost embarrassed by the attention. She walked toward the piano, touching the edge of it with gentle familiarity, as if greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. He stood up so she could take the seat, stepping back but staying close enough to watch. He didn't want to miss how this would unfold. She adjusted the bench quietly, making sure it didn't wobble too much. Then she placed her hands on her lap for a moment, steadying herself. The room seemed to grow softer around her. The energy changed, becoming calm and expectant. The pianist felt a small spark of curiosity. Something told him this moment was worth paying attention to. She finally set her fingers on the keys. They didn't move yet, just rested there, still and thoughtful. But in that stillness, there was something almost familiar. Her posture, her breathing, the way she touched the keys with both care and confidence. It wasn't the posture of a beginner. It wasn't even the posture of someone who played casually. It was the posture of someone who once had a deep connection with music. He noticed it immediately. She closed her eyes gently, as if searching for a long-lost sound inside her memory. The volunteers leaned forward slightly. The pianist felt the room grow quiet behind him. She had not played a single note yet, but somehow the silence around her already felt different, calm, charged, expectant. Then she lifted her fingers slightly, preparing to press the first key. And in that tiny, quiet second before any sound came out. The pianist realized something. This woman was not ordinary. Not at all. Something in her stillness held the weight of a musician who had once known far more than she admitted. He stood there, waiting, unaware that the next moment would surprise him more deeply than anything he had experienced in years. The woman's fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. The small room was quiet, almost too quiet, like everyone held their breath without realizing it. The famous pianist stood a few steps behind her, watching with a light smile, expecting her to play something short and simple. Maybe a children's tune. Maybe a few random notes. He didn't expect anything serious, but he also sensed something unusual about the way she held herself. It was subtle, almost hidden, but it was there. A touch of familiarity, like her hands remembered a world she no longer dared to visit. She pressed one key, just one, and the soft note floated into the air. It wasn't loud or strong, but it had a kind of purity that made the pianist straighten slightly. She touched another key, then another, shaping a small pattern. A few volunteers smiled kindly, thinking she was warming up or testing the piano like he had earlier. But she wasn't testing it. Her fingers were searching. For what? He didn't know. After a few seconds, she lifted her hands from the keys, exhaling slowly. She looked almost embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't think I should." Before she could stand up, one of the volunteers gently encouraged her. "Just a little more." It sounded nice. She hesitated again. Her shoulders rose and fell in a small breath, and finally she nodded. She placed her hands back on the keyboard, this time with more certainty, as if she had made a quiet promise to herself. The pianist leaned casually against a nearby table, keeping his expression playful to make her feel comfortable. "No pressure," he said softly. "Just have fun." She gave a brief smile, grateful, but still nervous. Then she pressed the first full chord. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it had weight. The kind of weight that only comes from emotion, not technique. The pianist felt something shift inside him. That one chord didn't sound like the playing of a beginner or a casual hobbyist. It carried a story, though she didn't speak a single word. She moved into a simple melody, the kind people often play when they're alone in their homes and don't expect anyone to listen. It was soft, almost fragile, but there was a hidden strength beneath it. Her fingers were steady but gentle, like she didn't want to disturb the air too much. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to perform. She was remembering. The volunteers listened politely, swaying a little, enjoying the peacefulness of it. It was different from the pianist's earlier cheerful tune. Hers was quieter, more personal. It felt like a whisper meant only for the piano. Halfway through the melody, she paused not because she forgot, but because something in her expression changed. She closed her eyes again. Her face softened, as if the music had taken her somewhere far away. She pressed a new chord. This one was deeper, a little stronger. The room seemed to shift again, almost unnoticeably, but enough for the pianist to feel it. He uncrossed his arms and leaned slightly forward. He didn't want to miss anything. She continued playing, her hands moving with a mix of caution and confidence, as if she was walking across a familiar path she hadn't visited in years. The melody grew richer, shaped by feelings she never expressed out loud. The volunteers exchanged small looks with one another. They didn't understand exactly what they were hearing, but they could feel it had something special inside it. When she reached the last note, she let it fade until the sound dissolved into silence. The room remained still for a few more seconds. No one clapped. No one spoke. They simply absorbed the quiet. Then she moved her hands to her lap and lowered her head slightly. "That's all," she said quickly, as though she had done something wrong. "It's nothing. Just something I used to know." The pianist approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "It wasn't nothing," he said in a calm voice. "It had feeling." She shook her head. "I haven't played properly in a long time. I don't remember anything complicated." He smiled lightly. "Music isn't about complicated." Her eyes rose to his, uncertain. "Maybe, but what I played, it wasn't very good." One volunteer stepped in kindly. "It was beautiful. You should have seen his face while you were playing." The pianist laughed softly, though he didn't deny it. He had been surprised. Not overwhelmed, not blown away, but intrigued. There was something honest in her playing, something people couldn't fake. "I just liked the sound," she murmured, brushing a piece of hair behind her ear. "It brings back memories." Memories. He heard the weight in that word. She stood up from the bench, intending to give him the seat again. "Please, go ahead. You're the one performing tonight. You should practice." But the pianist shook his head. "Not yet. I want to hear more." Her eyes widened. "Oh, no. I really shouldn't. That was everything." He smiled gently. "I don't believe that." She looked away, unsure how to reply. The volunteers stood back, watching the exchange with interest. They didn't want to interrupt the moment. They felt something quietly meaningful happening, though none of them understood exactly what it was. The woman took another step back from the piano, tucking her hands together. "I really don't know anything else. I used to play when I was young, but life became busy. I stopped practicing. I let it go." The pianist nodded slowly. He had heard similar stories from many people who once loved music. Life had a way of moving them away from the piano, even when their hearts stayed there. He walked around the bench, lightly tapping the top of the piano with his fingertips. "Tell me," he said kindly, "why did you stop?" She paused, looking down at her shoes. "It's a long story." "We have time," he said gently, though his tone wasn't pushy. The volunteers also stayed quiet, curious but respectful. The woman hesitated for a long moment before speaking. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "I stopped because I needed to. People depended on me. I had responsibilities. The piano felt like a luxury, and I didn't have space in my life for that kind of dream anymore." The pianist listened carefully. He was used to hearing stories of sacrifice, but every person's story carried its own weight. She continued, "And after years went by, I thought, maybe music didn't need me anymore. Maybe it was better to leave it behind." He shook his head, not in disagreement, but in quiet disbelief. "Music doesn't leave people behind," he whispered. She looked at him with tired eyes. "Sometimes it feels like it does." He couldn't argue. He understood what she meant, even though he lived a completely different life. Fame didn't protect him from feelings of loss or doubt. It just hid them. He sat down on the bench again, but didn't touch the keys. "What was the melody you played?" he asked softly. It sounded personal. Her fingers brushed lightly against her arm, as if she was comforting herself. "It was something I came up with years ago. Nothing special. It was special enough for you to remember it," he said. She didn't reply. He leaned forward slightly. "I want you to try something. Nothing difficult. Just answer honestly." She looked at him warily, unsure of what he would ask. "When you were playing," he said, "even for that short moment, did it feel good?" Her eyes softened. She wasn't quick to answer, but when she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes," he smiled gently. "Then music hasn't left you." The volunteers exchanged thoughtful glances. The room felt warmer, as if the conversation itself had shifted the air. She took a quiet breath. "Maybe, but I don't know if I should play more. I don't want to embarrass myself." "You won't," he said with calm certainty. "And even if you did, it wouldn't matter. Music isn't about perfection. It's about connection. She looked down again, her fingers nervously touching one another. I'm just not ready. That's okay, he replied kindly. No one is asking you to perform, just to play. She considered his words, her eyes moving from the piano to the floor. Maybe another time, she whispered. The pianist nodded, respecting her decision. He didn't want to push her, but something inside him told him she wasn't finished, not truly. He sensed a quiet stir in her, like a door opening just a little. He stood and moved aside, giving her space. If you ever want to play more, he said softly, I'll be here. She gave a small, shy smile. Thank you, but I think you should practice now. He nodded, returning to the bench. He began playing a gentle tune, not flashy or loud, simply warm. The volunteers listened, grateful for the music, but the pianist's eyes occasionally drifted toward the woman. She stood nearby, watching him with a thoughtful expression, almost conflicted. She wasn't listening to the music the way others were. She was listening to something inside herself, something she hadn't allowed to speak in years, and though she didn't touch the piano again in that moment, he could tell she was closer to it than she had been in a long time. She didn't know it yet. He didn't know it yet. But this was only the beginning. The woman stood quietly near the piano while the famous pianist continued to play a soft tune. She didn't move much, but her eyes said more than her silence ever could. She looked thoughtful, almost distant, as if the music stirred something she had locked away for a long time. The volunteers drifted in and out of the room, checking decorations and adjusting lights, but she remained rooted to the same spot, her hands lightly held together. The pianist noticed her stillness and softened his playing, letting the music wrap gently around the moment. He didn't want to overwhelm her with loud sounds or fast notes. He simply let the melody flow, hoping she would feel comfortable staying near him. After a while, he finished the tune and let the last note melt into the air before turning around. You stayed, he said softly, surprised but pleased. She blinked, as if waking from a gentle dream. I didn't want to interrupt. You weren't interrupting, he replied. I don't mind people listening. She looked down shyly. It sounded beautiful. He thanked her with a small nod. Would you like to try again? Only if you want to. Her eyes widened a little, and she took a small step backward. Oh no, I think I've played enough for today. My hands get stiff, and I don't want to make people wait. No one is waiting, he assured her. And your hands didn't look stiff at all. She gave a tiny laugh, shaking her head lightly. They felt stiff. Maybe because you were nervous, he said gently. She didn't disagree. Her silence confirmed it more clearly than words. The pianist rested his hands on the keys again, but didn't play. Do you know what helped me when I was young? He asked. Someone told me that nerves mean you care. They're not a weakness. They're a sign you're alive. She tilted her head slightly, considering his words. Maybe, but I don't think the piano needs me to care anymore. He leaned forward. I disagree. She bit the inside of her cheek gently, uncomfortable, yet touched by how sincerely he spoke. She wasn't used to someone noticing her feelings like that. Before she could reply, one of the volunteers called from the hallway. We need to test the microphones. Another added, and we still have to move 2 boxes. The pianist nodded politely toward the doorway. Go ahead, I'll come in a moment, he said, but the woman stepped back even more, as if she didn't want to be in anyone's way. I should help them, she murmured. They need extra hands. They have enough hands, the pianist said softly. Stay for a little longer. She looked at him uncertainly. Why? He hesitated, unsure how honest he should be. Because when you played earlier, the room felt different. I'm curious. Curious? She repeated, surprised. Yes, he said simply. Your playing had something in it. Something real. The woman pressed her lips together, almost embarrassed. I didn't mean to make anything feel different. It was just an old tune. Old tunes carry stories, he replied. She didn't respond, but her gaze softened slightly. A volunteer called again. She turned her head toward the door, torn between leaving and staying. The pianist sensed that if she walked out now, the moment might slip away, and she might not return to the piano again today, or ever dot, so he switched his approach. All right, he said lightly. How about this? You don't have to play anything. Just sit down at the piano while I show you something. No pressure. She looked confused. Sit and just watch? Yes, that's it. She hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the center of attention. Even watching someone else from close range made her nervous if too many eyes were on her. The pianist noticed her hesitation. Everyone is busy outside. They won't come in right now, he reassured her. She considered this carefully. Finally, she took a soft breath and nodded. Okay, for a moment. He stepped aside, motioning politely for her to take the bench. She sat down slowly, as if she didn't fully trust the wobbling seat. Her hands rested in her lap once more, fingers curling and uncurling with quiet nervousness. The pianist stood beside her, not too close, giving her space. Do you see the keys here? He asked, pointing at a set near the center. She nodded. Try pressing this one, he said, touching a white key lightly, but not pushing it down. She looked at him questioningly. Just press it? Yes, just one key. With a small breath, she pressed it. A clear note sounded. Now this one, he said, pointing to another. She pressed that too. And then this one. She followed again. He smiled. See? You're already playing. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You're just making fun of me. No, he replied with warmth. I'm showing you that music doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes beauty starts with simple notes. Her expression softened. I guess that's true. Now, he continued, try pressing these 3 keys in the same order as before. She looked nervous again. I might mess it up. Messing up is allowed here, he said gently. She nodded, took a breath, and pressed the 3 keys slowly, one by one. The pattern created a small, sweet sound. Nothing grand, nothing huge, just a simple chain of notes that hung gently in the air. He nodded approvingly. That's lovely. It's nothing, she murmured. Everything starts from nothing, he replied. She glanced at him, unsure how to react. Compliments made her uncomfortable, especially when they came from someone known worldwide for his mastery of music. But the way he spoke didn't feel like he was trying to flatter her. It felt genuine. Try it again, he said. She repeated the 3 notes, slightly smoother this time. He leaned in just a bit. And again. She did dot this time. The notes sounded even gentler, carrying a kind of softness people develop only when they're careful and thoughtful with instruments. Do you hear that? Hear what? Hear what? The way your hands settle into the melody. They're remembering. She blinked. Remembering? Yes, hands remember too. Her eyes softened as she looked at the keys. I used to play a lot, she admitted in a quiet voice. Back when I had time. Back when life was different. He nodded. And your hands remember that. They never really forget. Her fingers moved unconsciously toward the keys again, but she withdrew them quickly. I don't know if I believe that. You will, he said with a peaceful certainty. She looked away again, shy. A few seconds passed before she whispered, Why are you being so patient with me? He smiled, because someone once did the same for me. She looked up at him with surprise. Really? Yes, he answered simply. People helped me. I want to give that back. There was a quiet sincerity in his tone that made her chest warm slightly. She wasn't sure what to say, so she remained silent. Her eyes drifted back toward the piano keys, and she touched one gently with a fingertip, almost like testing the temperature of water before deciding to step in. The pianist nodded gently. Try a small tune you remember. Anyone. It doesn't matter if it's short or simple. She tensed. I don't know. Even if it's just a few notes, he encouraged. I'm right here. She took a long breath, and he saw her chest rise and fall slowly. Her fingers hovered uncertainly above the keys. The room grew quiet again, with only the faint sounds of people working in the hallway. Her hand shook just a little as she pressed the first note. It was soft, almost uncertain, but it resonated clearly. She pressed another, shaping the beginning of something familiar, though faint. He watched closely. The way she touched the keys wasn't the way beginners played. Her fingers curved naturally, resting lightly but confidently. Her wrist didn't bend too sharply. Her posture straightened slightly as she focused. Then she played a tiny section of the tune. She had played earlier a small piece, no more than a few seconds long, and stopped quickly, pulling her hands away as though she had made a mistake. I don't remember the rest, she said quickly. Embarrassed. But that part was beautiful, he replied without hesitation. She shook her head. It wasn't. It was, he insisted softly. Because it meant something to you. She swallowed, unsure how to reply. Her eyes lowered to the keys again, and for a brief moment, she looked like someone standing at the edge of a long-forgotten path, wondering if she should step onto it again. The pianist watched her with quiet patience. He didn't push further, knowing pressure would make her retreat. Instead, he said, Why don't you stay a little longer? Just sit here. You don't have to play. She nodded carefully and stayed on the bench. She sat in silence while he returned to the piano and played a gentle melody, not for himself, not for the volunteers, but for her. A tune that felt like an invitation, not a performance. As he played, she closed her eyes again. Not because she was trying to remember music, but because something inside her softened, like a small part of her heart, warming after years of cold edges. And though she didn't touch the keys again that moment, something had changed. She wasn't walking away anymore. She was slowly turning toward the music, toward a part of herself she thought she had buried forever. And the pianist, though he didn't say it aloud, felt certain of one thing. Her real story with the piano had not ended, that it was only just beginning again. The small room grew quieter as the afternoon went on. Most of the volunteers had stepped out to continue preparations for the evening event, leaving only the soft hum of distant footsteps and the faint creak of chairs being moved in the main hall. The woman remained seated near the piano, not playing now, but also not leaving. She stayed because something inside her felt pulled toward the instrument, like a memory knocking gently on a door she hadn't opened in years. The pianist played a soft tune beside her, but he played differently now. This wasn't the confident, polished style he used in big concert halls. This melody was simple, thoughtful, almost like he was speaking through the keys instead of performing. Every note floated gently into the air and settled around her like warm light. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to reach her. She watched his hands move across the keys. His fingers looked effortless, gliding from one note to the next with calm confidence. But she didn't feel intimidated. Instead, she felt something unexpected comfort. Watching him play felt like watching a familiar river flow, steady and natural. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if wanting to follow his. She folded them together quickly, almost as if she was afraid someone would notice. The pianist glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. Are you all right? He asked softly. Yes, she said, though her voice carried a hint of uncertainty. I'm just thinking. About what? She hesitated. About music. About the past. About things I haven't thought about in a long time. He nodded gently, not asking for more. He knew she would speak only when she felt ready. He continued playing, letting the melody drift lightly through the room. She closed her eyes, not meaning to, but the sound carried her back to a time when she used to sit at a piano every day, practicing until her hands were tired. Back then, music wasn't a memory, it was her world. A world she had loved. A world she had left behind for reasons both painful and necessary. When she opened her eyes, the pianist had stopped playing. He looked at her with calm curiosity. "Where did you learn to play?" he asked gently. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I learned when I was young. I used to take classes. Serious ones. But I didn't continue." "You sound like you learned very well," he said. She shook her head quickly. "I'm not good anymore." "Maybe not practiced," he corrected. "But the heart doesn't forget." She looked down, a small ache rising in her chest. "I used to want to be a pianist," she whispered. "Not like you. Not famous. Just someone who played music every day. I wanted to teach. I wanted to compose. I wanted a simple life around the piano." He listened silently, but then things happened. Life changed, and I had to grow up fast. Her voice tightened, but she didn't cry. She just stared at the keys with a sadness that seemed older than her years. I had to let it go. He didn't push her for details. He sensed that her story didn't need to be told in full. The weight of it was already clear. He asked a different question instead. "Do you miss it?" She hesitated, as if afraid to admit the truth. "Yes, but sometimes I feel it's too late to go back." He leaned forward slightly. "It's never too late for music." She let out a small breath, unsure whether to believe him. He stood up slowly, stepping away from the bench. "Come here," he said gently. "I want to show you something." She looked uncertain. "What do you mean?" "Just stand here, beside me." She rose carefully, unsure of what he intended. He placed her near the center of the piano, where the keys were the most responsive. "Put your hand here," he said, guiding her toward the middle keys without touching her. He pointed to a group of notes. "Play these 3. She shook her head lightly. "I don't know what they are." "You don't need to know their names," he said softly. "Just press them." With a deep breath, she pressed the first key. It rang softly. She pressed the second, then the third. A fragile little chord formed, simple but warm. "Now," he said, "press them again, but slower." She did. The sound stretched a little longer, a little fuller. He listened closely. "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" "How the sound changes when you let yourself feel it," he said. She looked at him with a puzzled expression. "I'm not sure." He nodded gently. "Try it again." She repeated the 3-note chord several times, and each time her touch softened just a little. Her shoulders loosened. Her breathing relaxed. And with every repetition, her sound grew more human, more alive. The pianist smiled quietly. "That's it." "What?" she asked. "You're playing from your heart, not from memory." Her eyes widened slightly. She had never thought of it that way. He stepped aside again, giving her the bench. "Sit down," he said. "Only if you want to." She hesitated for a moment. Then she sat. She placed her hands on the keys again, this time without him asking. She wasn't confident, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Her hands trembled slightly, but they no longer felt stiff or forced. She started playing the same small tune she had played earlier, the soft, personal melody that had filled the room with a quiet, emotional warmth. This time it flowed smoother, like a memory settling into place. The pianist stood beside her silently, watching with calm admiration. Her playing grew a little stronger, each note carrying a quiet honesty. She didn't try to play perfectly. She simply played. Her eyes closed naturally, her head tilting slightly as she let herself sink into the melody. Something about the way she moved changed. Her back straightened. Her fingers curved more naturally. Her breathing deepened. She looked like someone returning to a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. The room fell completely silent. No footsteps, no sounds from outside. Only her music filled the air. Then something unexpected happened. Her melody shifted. Almost accidentally, but meaningfully. She moved into a progression that wasn't part of the simple tune she had shown earlier. It was deeper, richer. It carried sadness, but also hope. A flicker of strength. The pianist's eyes widened slightly. She wasn't just remembering her old tune. She was creating again. The volunteers outside paused in their work. One slowly stepped into the hallway outside the room, listening with surprise. Another stopped carrying decorations and stood still. Her music wasn't loud, yet it somehow reached into the hallway, pulling people closer without calling them. The pianist felt a chill, not the cold kind, but the kind that comes when something meaningful blooms. Unexpectedly, this wasn't someone just playing. Again, this was someone whose soul was starting to speak after years of silence. When she finally reached the last note, she held it longer than before, letting it fade slowly into the quiet. Her shoulders relaxed. A deep breath escaped her lips, and then silence settled. A true silence. The kind that doesn't feel empty, but full. The pianist didn't speak right away. He wanted to honor the moment. The woman opened her eyes slowly. She looked at the keys first, then at him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to play that much." "I'm glad you did," he said. She looked confused. "Why?" he answered softly. "Because that was the most honest music I've heard in a long time." Her breath caught slightly. I didn't know I could still play like that." "You didn't play with your hands," he said. "You played with your heart." She looked overwhelmed, unsure what to do with the compliment. "I wasn't thinking. I just felt something. That's what true musicians do." The volunteers in the hallway exchanged quiet looks. Even from there, they could feel the power of her playing. She lowered her eyes to the keys. "I didn't realize anyone was listening." "They weren't listening," he said quietly. "They were feeling it." She looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "I didn't mean to make them stop working. They stopped because your music asked them to," he said gently. Her hands trembled slightly. "I don't understand. Why would anyone care?" He stepped closer, his voice warm. "Because what you have is rare." She shook her head. "No, I'm just someone who used to play. Nothing special." "That's not true," he said firmly, but still gentle. "You have something inside you that many trained musicians never find." She looked away, afraid to believe it. He lowered his voice even more. "You muted the whole hallway without trying." She froze. "I muted it?" "Yes," he said softly. "Everyone stopped moving. Everyone stopped talking. Because your music made them feel something." She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "I didn't mean to." "You don't have to mean it," he replied. "That's what makes it real." For the first time since she sat at the piano, emotion flickered across her face, not fear, not embarrassment, but a quiet, trembling wonder. She whispered, "I didn't know I could still do that." He smiled gently. "Now you do." And in that moment, surrounded by silence and the lingering warmth of her music, she realized something she had forgotten long ago. She hadn't lost her gift. She had only hidden it. And now, without meaning to, she had opened the door again. It was the moment that changed everything. The room stayed silent long after she stopped playing. It wasn't the uncomfortable kind of silence, but the warm sort that follows something meaningful. She sat there at the piano bench, with her hands resting lightly on her lap, unsure what to do or say next. She felt exposed, like she had shown a piece of herself she didn't plan to reveal. But at the same time, she felt lighter, as if a weight she carried for years had shifted, even just a little. The pianist stood beside her, still quiet. He wasn't staring or trying to overwhelm her with praise. He simply looked thoughtful, as if he was trying to understand the moment just as much as she was. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't expect that." "What part?" he asked gently. "That I could still feel something like that," she said. "When I played earlier today, it didn't feel the same. But just now, it felt like something opened." He nodded slowly. "Because you allowed yourself to feel." She looked down at her hands again. Her fingers were still a little shaky, but they weren't cold anymore. They felt warm, almost alive. "It's strange," she said. "It feels like the music came from somewhere else." "Maybe it came from the part of you that never disappeared," he said kindly. His words made her swallow hard. She wasn't used to hearing things like that. Most people she met in recent years didn't talk about dreams or hidden talents or anything that lived deep inside someone. People talked about jobs, groceries, plans for the weekend, chores, responsibilities, normal things. Safe things. Things that didn't make your heart ache. But music did. Music had always touched the part of her she kept tucked away. A few of the volunteers quietly returned to their tasks, trying not to disturb the moment. Even they seemed softer now, as if the music had left a gentle echo around the room. The pianist walked to the far side of the room, picked up a notebook filled with handwritten music sheets, and brought it back to her. He set it on the piano. "This is something I've been working on," he said. "A piece that isn't finished yet." She blinked. "You want me to look at it?" He nodded. "I want you to play the first part." She froze slightly. I don't know if I can read that well anymore." "It doesn't need to be perfect," he said softly. "Just see how it feels." She opened the notebook carefully. The writing was neat, clear, expressive. She followed the notes with her eyes the way she used to long ago. Her heart tightened a little. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It's missing something," he said quietly. "Maybe you'll find it." Her breath caught. "Me?" "Yes," he said simply. She looked at the notes again. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant but drawn in. She took a deep breath, then started playing the first few measures. It was slow, delicate, filled with a quiet sadness. She followed the notes as best she could, missing a few, hesitating at some rhythms. But the pianist didn't correct her. He only listened out as she continued. She reached a section where there were no notes, just blank space on the page. She paused. "It stops." "It doesn't stop," he corrected gently. "It waits." "For what?" "For your idea." She stared at the empty bars. "But I don't write music anymore." "Try." Her heart thumped softly in her chest. "What if I ruin it?" "You can't ruin something that hasn't been finished," he said. She looked at the blank space again. Her hands moved slowly across the keys, testing a few notes. At first, she was too careful, too unsure. The sounds were thin, almost hesitant. But after a moment, something shifted again, just like earlier. She felt the room fade a little. She felt her breath slow. And she played a small phrase. Just a few notes, soft, simple. The pianist closed his eyes as he listened. "There," he murmured. "That's the voice I was waiting for." "It wasn't anything special," she said quickly, embarrassed. "It was honest," he replied. "That's what music should be." She looked down at the keys, overwhelmed. She hadn't created anything new in years. She had convinced herself that part of her life was gone. But here she was, adding a melody to someone else's composition, and it felt natural, not forced, not wrong, not scary. It felt like she was breathing in a way she hadn't in years. He handed her a pencil. "Write it down." Her chest tightened again. "I don't know if I remember how to write it properly." "Just mark it however you remember," he said. "I'll understand." She took the pencil with a nervous breath. She made small marks on the page, shaky but clear enough. When she finished, she stared at what she had written, stunned at herself. The pianist smiled. "You see? You haven't lost it." "But I feel like I'm dreaming," she whispered. "Then stay in the dream a little longer." A few volunteers approached the door again, curious but respectful. One of them whispered, "We haven't heard the piano played like that in this place for years." Another nodded quietly. The woman felt her face warm. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. She stood up quickly from the bench. "I should go help everyone," she said. "They're working on the event." But the pianist shook his head gently. "They're fine. And besides, they heard your music." "I think that helped more than anything." She looked uncertain. "I don't want to get in the way." "You didn't," he said. "You inspired them." Her breath caught. "I inspired them?" "Yes." She didn't know how to react. The idea felt foreign, almost unreal. The pianist studied her for a moment, then asked, "Why did you stop playing?" "If you don't mind me asking." She hesitated. "Life happened," she said softly. "Responsibilities, fear, doubt, and someone once told me I wasn't good enough to make music a real part of my life." The pianist's expression softened. "That must have hurt." "It did," she said quietly. "I believed them. And once I believed them, I couldn't hear anything else. Even when I played for fun, I heard that voice in the back of my mind." "Do you hear it now?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "No," she said, surprised. "I didn't hear it at all just now." "That's because the truth drowned it out," he said gently. She felt a strange wave of emotion. "I don't know if I'm ready to play again." "Not fully. It feels big. It feels like reopening something I locked away for a reason." He nodded with genuine understanding. "You don't have to decide today, or tomorrow, or next week. But don't close the door again. Leave it open, even just a little. Let the music breathe." She looked at the piano. It didn't look intimidating anymore. It looked inviting, almost familiar. One of the volunteers finally stepped inside the room. "We're done setting the tables," they said. "We just need a short break." The music was really beautiful. The woman smiled shyly. "Thank you. We didn't know you played," the volunteer said. "You should play tonight, during the event." Her eyes widened. "Oh no, I couldn't. That's too much." But before she could continue, another volunteer chimed in from behind them. It would make the evening feel more special. She shook her head slowly. "I'm not ready for that." The pianist spoke softly. "Then don't think of it as performing. Think of it as sharing." "Sharing," she repeated. "Yes," he said. "Not for applause, not for attention. Just to share something honest." She looked conflicted. She wanted to say no, but a part of her, the part that had come alive at the piano, didn't want to retreat. She felt caught between fear and curiosity. I'll think about it," she whispered. "That's enough for now." The pianist said warmly. The volunteers smiled and left, closing the door gently behind them. She turned to the pianist again. "Do you really think I should play tonight?" "I think you should choose what feels true," he said, "not what feels safe." She stared at the blank bars of the unfinished music on the page. The melody she had written was simple, but it meant something. It was her, a piece of her she didn't know still existed. "Can I stay here for a while?" she asked quietly. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need." He stepped toward the door. Before leaving, he paused and looked back at her. "One more thing," he said, What? Don't underestimate how powerful your music can be. You change the energy of an entire room without trying. Imagine what you could do if you played with intention. The words struck her deeply. When he left, she sat alone at the piano, staring at the keys. The sun was setting outside, casting warm, golden light across the room. The dust in the air sparkled gently in the sunlight. Floating like tiny stars. She touched the keys again. Just one note, then another, then a soft chord. She wasn't practicing. She wasn't performing. She was simply thinking through sound. The melody she created earlier echoed in her mind. She played a few pieces of it again, letting it grow a little. She added a soft variation, then another. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She closed her eyes. She remembered herself as a young person, sitting at a piano in a small classroom, dreaming of writing music that made people feel something. She remembered how alive she felt back then. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel sad about that memory. She felt connected to it. As she played, she whispered to herself, maybe I'm not done with music after all. The room didn't answer. The piano did. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone with her melody. The hall that evening seemed almost unreal to the woman. She stood behind the curtain, unsure if she belonged there, or if someone had somehow mistaken her for someone else. The warm lights, the quiet hum of people finding their seats, the slow rustle of programs being opened, all of it felt far away, as if she were watching from another world. She kept her hands clasped together, pressing her fingertips to keep them from trembling. It had been so long since she had stood on any stage. She never imagined she would ever stand on one again. On the other side of the curtain, the famous pianist spoke with the event organizers, smiling politely, but looking toward the backstage area every few seconds, almost as if he was making sure she hadn't run away. He had insisted she join him for a duet, not because he needed to make a scene or try to be kind in a showy way, but because he genuinely respected the way she played. He said it quietly, without the tone of someone trying to flatter. That was why she agreed, not out of confidence, but out of trust. The host walked backstage to check on her. He asked if she needed water or a moment to breathe. She thanked him softly, saying she was fine, though she wasn't sure it was true. Her thoughts bounced around anxiously. What if her hands shook? What if she forgot a note she had practiced? What if the audience expected something grand, as she could only offer something simple? She tried to remind herself that the pianist would be beside her, and that she wasn't alone. But even that comfort felt fragile. The pianist finally slipped through the curtain and joined her backstage. He didn't give a long speech. He didn't try to boost her confidence with big promises. He simply said, "You play from the heart. That's all you need. Just be yourself out there." She nodded quietly, grateful for his simple honesty. It didn't erase her nerves, but it gave her a peaceful place to rest them. A long, low chime rang through the hall. The host gave the crowd a quick welcome speech, then announced the duet as the opening performance. The pianist looked at her with a steady expression, then offered his hand, not in a dramatic gesture, but in a quiet invitation. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Together they stepped out onto the stage. The audience applauded warmly, unaware of her long absence from music, unaware of her personal story, unaware of the weight she carried inside. She gave a small bow, trying not to draw attention to herself. The pianist settled at his usual place, and she took her seat on the second bench beside him. The piano looked larger than she remembered, almost intimidating, but also familiar, like a friend she had not visited in years. When both benches were settled, the pianist whispered, "Ready?" She didn't speak. She just breathed out gently and nodded. The hall grew completely silent. It wasn't the silence of expectation or pressure. It was the silence of people leaning in, ready to listen. She placed her fingers on the keys. They felt cool at first. Her heart beat hard. Then, slowly, she let her hands relax. The pianist nodded once more, then lifted his hands to begin. They started to piece together. Gentle, thoughtful, soft. It wasn't a complicated composition. It wasn't filled with dramatic runs or showy patterns. It was a simple melody, one that rested on emotion more than technique. Their playing blended naturally, as if they'd practiced together for years instead of just hours. His sound was confident, smooth, steady. Hers was warm, delicate, filled with depth and sincerity. Halfway through the piece, something inside her shifted. Her nerves didn't vanish, but they settled into a quiet place. Her breathing steadied. Her fingers loosened. The hall felt less like a stage and more like a shared space, a place where everyone was simply listening to a story. She wasn't performing. She was sharing a piece of her life that she had kept buried for too long. The pianist glanced at her briefly, not to check if she was keeping up, but to acknowledge her presence, a silent message that she belonged there. She met his eyes for a moment, then returned to the keys, letting the music guide her. The melody grew fuller, richer. She felt her chest lighten, as if she had been carrying something heavy for years, and was finally letting it go. When the piece reached its quietest passage, she carried the melody alone. Her hands moved with gentle confidence. The notes floated through the hall, soft enough to make the air feel still, but strong enough to reach everyone in the room. People leaned forward in their chairs. Some closed their eyes. Some clasped their hands together. Even the volunteers from earlier in the day smiled at one another, remembering the moment they first discovered her hidden talent. The pianist joined her again for the final section. Their combined sound felt like two stories woven into one, his polished skill and her heartfelt sincerity meeting in the middle. The last notes faded gradually, carried softly into silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. No applause. No shifting. Just silence. Deep, full, thoughtful silence. Then the hall burst into warm applause. Not thunderous, not wild, but sincere, steady, and filled with appreciation. She bowed quickly, almost shyly, not used to such attention. The pianist gave her a small, respectful nod before bowing himself. They sat for a moment, letting the applause wash over them, then rose and walked off stage together. Backstage, she felt overwhelmed. Her hands, which had been steady during the performance, now trembled slightly. But this time, the shaking came not from fear, but from emotion, relief, disbelief, gratitude. She pressed her hands together and breathed deeply, letting the moment sink in. The pianist thanked her sincerely, not in a grand way, but in a genuine personal tone. He told her that her playing had brought something real to the performance, something he hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't know what to say. She simply thanked him back for giving her a chance she never expected. As the evening continued, people approached her backstage to compliment her. Volunteers, organizers, even some audience members who had been moved by the performance. She accepted their kind words with quiet gratitude, still not fully comfortable with the attention, but appreciating the warmth behind it. Later, when the concert was over and the hall had emptied, she walked back through the quiet lobby. The old upright piano she had played earlier that day still stood in the corner. She smiled slightly at the memory of that moment. How she had played without thinking anyone cared. How she had been seen when she expected to blend into the background. And how that small moment had led her to the stage. The pianist met her near the doors before leaving. They exchanged a final few words, simple ones about music, life, and the meaning of sharing something from the heart. He told her that if she ever wanted to play again in any setting, he would be happy to help her find a place to do so. She nodded, touched by his sincerity, but not thinking too far ahead. She wasn't planning a return to music as a career, but she realized she didn't need to hide her love for it anymore. She stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered softly across the pavement. The noise of distant cars, soft conversations, and evening footsteps wrapped around her gently. She walked slowly, feeling lighter than she had in years. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about all the years she had missed playing. She wasn't thinking about what she gave up or what she could have been. She was thinking about what she had just experienced, a moment of connection, a moment of being seen, a moment of sharing her heart through sound. As she reached the end of the street, she paused for a moment. She took a long, peaceful breath. Then she walked on, carrying a quiet sense of hope with her. The night felt calm, and her steps felt steady. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she had found something inside herself again, something she thought she had lost forever, and that was enough.